Welcome everyone, I am Brad with UnwiredView.com. We are going to be doing a review today of the HTC EVO Shift 4G. That's a huge name for a phone, isn't it? And it also sounds familiar because of the original HTC EVO 4G that came out last year. Now this one here, just to show it off a little bit, this one here is not exactly the same. It's not identical by any means, nor is it a sequel to the original EVO. With the original EVO, you had such crazy specs in it as an 8 megapixel camera, frontward facing camera, gigahertz processor, and a 4.3 inch screen. So all these top of the line specs made it one of the most sought out or sought after, whatever you choose, phones in 2010. The EVO Shift 4G could be considered more of the little brother of the original EVO, where it definitely complements it. It's in the same family, but it also doesn't have as many of the top-of-line specs. For example, it doesn't have a frontward-facing camera. It has a different processor in it, and the camera, the backwards-facing camera, is 5 megapixels. So those are just a few things. And oh, I forgot to mention full QWERTY keyboard. Very important to mention. And it's a smaller screen as a result of that. So, what we're going to do today is check it out. I'm going to tell you exactly what I thought about the Shift 4G, and is it definitely a worthy member of the EVO family. Here we have the EVO Shift 4G. You can definitely tell it's an EVO, or is part of that EVO family, just because of the overall look of it. Now, it may not have the large screen like the original EVO did, but it certainly has the same round buttons at the very bottom that the original EVO did. Just another simple, obvious difference is going to be just the fact that you have that full keyboard. So it's always interesting to me to see this lineup. I think it's going to be very similar to the Droid lineup. I think that Sprint's going to be utilizing this EVO brand quite a bit more in a lot of their Android devices. So that's just speculation. I have no inside info on that, but I really wouldn't be surprised to see that. So looking into this, let's first go over the overall design of it. You heard me mention the buttons at the very bottom, where we have the home, the menu, the go back, and the search buttons. Nothing special or unique on this one, just the overall look of it, having the roundish nature of the buttons, I guess. Also, you have the 3.6 inch screen. This is slightly larger than you would see on an iPhone, for example, but definitely smaller than a Galaxy S or, of course, the original EVO, for that matter. Now, looking around this thing, as far as the overall design itself, this could have been a very boxy feeling device. A lot of phones with the full QWERTY keyboard sliding out tend to do that. But the thing I like about this, as you can tell, it's contoured, where you just have the back going inwards instead of just going straight up. If it were going straight up kind of like this and then out, that would definitely have a much more boxy feel to it. Over there, of course, we have the 5 megapixel camera with some speaker and LED flashing on there. We also have the 3.5 millimeter jack and the power button. So just some simple things. Don't forget the volume button right here, hard to see there, and then of course you also have the standard micro USB. So going further into this, the EVO Shift 4G happens to have the standard HTC user interface called Sense. So this one right here has a very, very similar look to that of not only the original EVO, but you would also find it on the Droid Incredible as another good example. Now basically with the Sense user interface, it's just like any other Android, except it has a few other little things that they like to throw in. For example, just by hitting the home button once, you've got all of the home screens. You can choose from any of these panels and just go straight to it. And then you hit the home button again, it takes you back to the main screen, and so on and so forth. So that can come in really handy if you just need to get to something in a jiffy without having to worry about sliding back and forth thinking, okay, where the heck is the dumb screen anyways. You can tell that, of course, just by the name itself, you have the 4G capability. I like how it has a little 4G toggle switch. Certainly, you can get rid of that if you don't like it. So you can just drag it right on down. That's the wonderful thing about Android, is it's customizable to you and to your liking. As far as other things about the Sense user interface, the clock up here always tends to be the standard thing on HTC Sense, but again, that's something that you can change around to a different clock, a different widget, or get rid of it altogether. You can also see there's a whole bunch of different sprint focused applications in here, the sprint zone and telenav, and then football, of course. And Sprint sure loves NASCAR. Now, all these other things are just simply widgets that can be replaced if you don't want them in there. So that's the other really nice thing. You can also have live wallpapers. All these things they're not unique to HTC Sense, but Sense typically throws it out there in such a certain way. Also, you have just the app tray here. It's not like TouchWiz where you have to go swipe left or right. This one's just one big ol' tray. So, for better or for worse, that's really up to you and your personal preference. Personally, I kind of like having the left to right, like the TouchWiz does. Onto the keyboard now. The keyboard itself is actually one of my favorite parts overall of the phone. The phone itself has been a great device. I've actually had a lot of fun with it. But just looking at this keyboard right here, that is a really fantastic keyboard. The thing about it is, looking at it, hopefully you can see that at these angles that I'm providing. But with this one, the size of the keys are just right for my sized fingers, and they're also slightly raised, but they're spaced out well enough. Thing is, there's some keyboards out there that are just so huge, so wide, that I just can't reach all of it. That's the problem that I had with the Epic 4G, for example. But with this one, all of it is definitely within reach without having to strain any of my fingers. And it's also separated out enough, and it has a little bit of bounce to it, so whenever I press it, there's a little bit of extra clicky, a little bit of a bounce that just makes it overall easier to recognize what I'm typing and when I'm typing it. As far as the layout itself, well, there's pros and cons. Personally, I'm a big fan of having a dedicated number row. This one, of course, is not dedicated. You just have to hit the FN to get to the numbers itself. Now, another thing about this, let's get that turned back on. Another thing about this is it has a little direction pad on there. So I can just keep clicking on there, left, right, and get into whatever I want. Let's say, oops. Let's say I'm going into the app tray itself. Then I can actually use that direction pad to get into what I want. One thing I'd also like to mention is the processor in here. In the unboxing video, I actually mentioned that it was an 800 megahertz processor and neglected to look into what generation of processor it was. And so I wrongly assumed that it was a lower speed processor than the gigahertz Snapdragon processor in the original EVO. So in comparing the two, I was thinking it was a slower processor, even though getting into everything was super snappy, super fast. Certainly it still is snappy and fast, but in my research I have discovered that the 800 megahertz processor in here is actually a second generation, whereas the one in the original EVO is a first generation. Thus, having the second generation processor makes it a little bit faster. There's a fewer, nicer features in it that make it basically as speedy, if not a little bit faster, than the gigahertz Snapdragon processor in the original EVO. So that was a little side note. I wanted to confess that I just didn't have all the right information. Just automatically assumed that it was going to be slower because of the number in it of itself. But frankly, with these phones and the processors inside them, there's a lot more to it than just the clock speed. Overall, I was rather happy with the EVO Shift 4G. The number one thing that I liked about it was the keyboard and how easy it was to type on it for fingers of my size. I also like the layout of the keyboard, though I do wish there were an extra row of numbers in there. Frankly, to keep it consistent with the size, though, without making it terribly large, I understand why they couldn't. The direction pad itself is kind of nice, but at the same time, what else could they have thrown in there instead to make it a little bit more efficient? As far as other things, the battery life on this has actually lasted quite a long time. On this one with moderate usage, this has definitely lasted me all day. So for an Android, that's saying a lot. I'm very happy to report that I've been good with the battery life. I also really like the way it fits in the hand. Certainly they designed it in such a way that it doesn't feel so boxy, and that was something I was really happy about. They definitely took a good opportunity and made the best out of it. So that's saying quite a lot, and I've always been a fan of HTC's design anyways. So those are a few things that I really like about the phone. As far as things that I don't like, I do feel as though they could have thrown in a few extra pieces of hardware to make it more like the original EVO, but just have it be the full keyboard version of it, where instead it's just more of a mid-range version that just happens to have a keyboard. All in all, the EVO Shift 4G is a worthy candidate for the EVO name. Definitely a good little brother to the original EVO. But the thing that you'll need to keep in mind is if you're looking for top of the line, keep looking. It's still in the original EVO. This one here, though, is definitely a great mid-range device that doesn't cost a whole lot. I believe currently it's $149 at Sprint, and then I believe you can get it for less at Amazon right now. I believe it's $120 as of this moment anyways. So definitely not as high-end as the original EVO, but frankly, this one is all I really need in a good performing smartphone. Yeah, I would like to have extra cool things in there, but it's not the end of the world. Life goes on, and most people that will use this particular phone don't really care about all that high-end componentry anyways. So for what it's worth, the EVO Shift 4G is a very good performing phone, and it's a great smartphone to boot. So I do find that it is going to be worth checking out, and especially for the price. So for unwiredview.com, my name is Brad Mullen. Please check out my full written review on our website, and thank you so much for watching this review.